One day, Hibiki finds himself being chased by an odd creature in an unknown land. Suddenly, he hears a voice offering to appraise the creature. When he looks back, he suddenly sees the creature's stats. The voice then asks if he wants to disable voice assistance, but he begs it not to leave him. Hibiki finds himself falling as the horned rabbit leaps to attack him, but it hits his bag instead. He falls onto the creature, knocking it out. In a forest, an elf named Emalia also hears a voice telling her to head east because something precious is there. Then the front of her tunic suddenly bursts open, causing her to become embarrassed. After the chase, Hibiki takes a moment to check his phone and sees that there is no signal. He also wonders who the voice was. He suddenly feels hungry and considers eating the horned rabbit. The voice begins appraising the rabbit. A screen appears, showing instructions for rabbit stew. He looks at the rabbit again and decides to take it with him, slightly disgusted since it's his first time touching a carcass. He stuffs it into his bag and decides to test something. He asks what his bag is while looking at it, and the voice appraises it, showing him its findings. He then looks at the sky and asks the same question, but the voice says there is nothing to appraise. He looks at the ground and asks again, and the voice tells him he is looking at a maze eater. He tries once more by looking at the sky and ground and again gets the same results. He realizes there is something dangerous on the ground, then decides to ask the voice to appraise him. A screen shows his stats and he sees his name, age, and race. He also learns that he is a provisional appraiser. The last thing he remembers is still being in high school, so he tries to ask the voice who they are. The voice reveals that she is his status support, but cannot answer personal information. He looks at his status again and sees he has several skills, so he tries to activate the one titled Expert Eye, but nothing happens. Embarrassed, he decides to start with the tutorial. The voice tells him that the tutorial is already running, so he decides to activate the world map, thinking it would be amazing. He gets disappointed when he sees it because the map only shows him an outline of where he ran, which happens to be several circles. However, since he has nothing better to do, he decides to use it. He walks forward until he reaches a road. In his excitement, he trips onto it. When he sits up, the voice shows him that he has received a new title called the Castaway in an isekai. He questions the word, but then he notices a huge dog-like creature next to him. Before it can attack, an arrow of light strikes the creature, causing it to fall. He looks forward and sees Emalia. At first, he is happy to see another person, but then he wonders why she is standing on a rock. He apologizes to Emalia for looking strange, but she simply gives him a kind smile and introduces herself. Hibiki introduces himself, then notices her odd ears. He thinks she's just wearing an elf cosplay and compliments her on it. Emalia is confused and asks what Hibiki is doing in the Maze Eater's grasslands. She is shocked by his explanation while Hibiki wonders what the big deal is. The voice appraises her and shows Hibiki all the information it retrieved, and he learns that she's a real-life elf. Hibiki also notices that Emalia does not seem to hear the voice or be aware that he is appraising her. However, the fact that she is 56 shocks him the most. Emalia decides to explain that the Maze Eater is a monster that disguises itself as grassland. She explains that Maze Eaters hardly attack directly and usually wait for their prey to grow exhausted. She then hugs him, praising him for surviving out there on his own. Hibiki gets the feeling that she thinks he is a child, so he bluntly tells her that he is 16, which shocks Emalia. Later that evening, Emalia apologizes for mistaking him for a child, and Hibiki is still wrapping his head around the fact that 16-year-olds are practically adults in this world. They decide to eat the stew she made with Hibiki's horned rabbit, and it is cleaned off easily. They sit down for some tea, and Hibiki finally asks her where this place is. She spits her tea on him in shock, but explains that they are in the kingdom of Habastria. It becomes clear that Hibiki is not aware of this, so he explains that he comes from a faraway country called Japan. When Emalia gives him a confused expression, Hibiki realizes he really was isekai'd. Emalia notices his troubled expression and tries to reassure him that he will be fine and that she will help him get to the city. They decide to settle in for the night, and Emalia casts a protective spell over them. She studies his sleeping form, noticing that his clothes seem odd. She wonders if Hibiki was the precious thing her spirit guide was talking about. She decides to save her questions for later, but as she drifts to sleep, she hears the spirit thanking her for protecting Hibiki. In Hibiki's dream, he is back in his world being served by Amani, one of his friends. He decides to take a sip of the tea and notices that it is stronger but tastier than usual. Amani is surprised he noticed, and Hibiki boasts that he is an adult now, but after studying his other friends, he realizes he lacks in the height department. Amani shares that she has not given up on growing, prompting Taiki to playfully agree with her. Kyuko begins to judge him, but he quickly turns the conversation back to Hibiki, explaining that Hibiki always seems to attract older women. Hibiki thinks Taiki is just imagining things, but Taiki explains that he also wants to get to know a girl over the summer. The group laughs, and Hibiki remembers that they were all about to start their summer break after that. He remembers going to school on the last day before the break, and when he entered the classroom, a bright light blinded him. He wakes up from the dream a little dazed. He checks his phone, thinking they all must be worried about him. He stores it away so he can go back to sleep, but then something hits him. He sees that Amalia's buttons have popped in her sleep. However, he is too distracted by the green floating lights. His status support tells him that it is an air alarm and his signal will trigger if an intruder enters the space. He studies the light and wonders if he will make it home. He decides to open his status screen to check his abilities. He asks his status support what an appraiser means. The voice tells him it is a rare job which allows the person to appraise monsters and items. However, he has no combat abilities and the voice does not explain why provisional was included in his job class. He decides to go to bed instead of trying to understand everything. The next morning, Amalia is the first to wake up and remembers that she had rescued Hibiki. She remembers that Hibiki is an adult, which technically means she had spent an evening with a man. She tries to calm herself by telling herself that it is common for party members to share a space, but then recalls she has never been part of a party, and that kind of depresses her. It is only then that she realizes her buttons are no longer in place. Her shock alerts Hibiki. He greets her with good morning, then returns one of her buttons, commenting on how big she is. The comment earns him a smack from her. After that, they begin making their way to Lowell. Hibiki worries about monsters, but Amalia reassures him that she can handle them. Still, she comments that she is impressed he can sense them, and he reveals he used his world map skill. This shocks Amalia because the skill is very rare. Amalia asks what his job class is, and he reveals that he is a provisional appraiser, which confuses her. He wonders how great the skill is because he does not find it useful, but Amalia insists that it is extremely useful for survival. She tells him that any adventurer would love to have that skill. When he looks confused at the word adventurer, Amalia nearly loses her mind, so he lies and says he knows what adventurers are while quietly asking his status support for answers. Amalia begins to realize how he had managed to survive the grasslands. But judging by his actions, she concludes that he is pretty clueless and ignorant, even if they had just met yesterday. She smiles as she apologizes for her harsh words, and Hibiki decides to ask her bluntly if she has any friends. She struggles to lie, but says that she does. Hibiki also says that he considers her his friend, which makes Amalia blush at the idea of finally having a friend. Hibiki decides to check the surroundings and mentions there is a crystal horn rabbit nearby. Amalia gets excited and says that crystal horn rabbits are sought after since the horn can be used to make potions and can sell for 200 gold coins. She decides to drag Hibiki to the location so they can hunt it. They hide nearby when they spot it and decide to slowly inch closer so it cannot use its escape skill. Hibiki warns that it has detect, so Amalia casts a spell that reduces their sound and odor. Amalia takes the opportunity to praise Hibiki, saying that an adventuring party would love to have him. Hibiki seems unsure since his job does not let him fight. Amalia tells him that party members with fighting abilities should worry about that, and all he will need to do is provide support and avoid danger. Hibiki is so worried that he does not even hear Amalia try to invite him to form a party. When he tries to get Amalia to repeat her question, she decides not to ask him, feeling embarrassed because she sounds desperate. She tries to convince herself she does not need a party, but then makes it her goal to impress Hibiki during this hunt, so he will ask to stay with her. She suddenly feels determined, and Hibiki gets the feeling that she really likes money. Amalia gets prepared to use her bow, and Hibiki notices she carries no arrows. As she pulls the string back, she explains she is a spirit archer, so the wind can turn into her arrows. She releases a full-powered shot, but the creature manages to dodge easily, which makes her feel very disappointed. Hibiki wonders if there is a way to stop the escape skill, and Amalia says skills are usually turned off when a creature attacks something. Hibiki suggests using himself as bait, but Amalia is not sure since it is dangerous, and she is not certain if the rabbit will fall for that trick. But Hibiki reassures her that the rabbit is stupid. Just as planned, Hibiki manages to lure and trap the rabbit, which causes it to become angry at him and try to attack. Before it gets the chance, Amalia attacks it, ending the hunt. Amalia is surprised that it was very easy to hunt, and the rabbit even considered Hibiki to be ultra weak, which is why it tried attacking him. Meanwhile, Hibiki is bombarded with several notifications of his level increasing. He tells Amalia about it since she did the hunting, but Amalia explains that he used his skills a lot, so it is only normal that he leveled up. She thanks him for the success of the job, raising a prize in the air, but the action causes her button to pop off again. Meanwhile, the chief god watches them from the heavens, hoping that this life will treat Hibiki well. In another town, a girl named Ever gets accepted as an adventurer and says that for her first job, she will be searching for something. After traveling around, Hibiki and Amalia finally reach the town of Raoul, where Amalia drapes her cloak over Hibiki to hide his odd clothing. She tells him that with the money they can exchange for the crystal horn, they should have enough to buy him clothes and even weapons. Hibiki wonders how much one gold coin costs, so he tries to ask his status support, who manages to come up with a table showing how much coins cost compared to yen. He is shocked that a single gold coin can cost so much and suddenly understands why Emalia had a crazed look in her eyes when they learned about the crystal horn rabbit. Emalia then cups his face and tells him not to look so clueless in town, and Hibiki can tell that her harsh words prevent her from making friends. When they enter the guild hall, some adventurers are surprised that Emalia has finally formed a party, but Hibiki only looks like a child to them. Then a party called Silver Banner manages to ease the tension of the group, advising Hibiki that the others just like stirring up trouble. They wish Hibiki luck, then head out of the guild, and Emalia leads him to the counter. At the front, Emalia introduces Hibiki to Jewel, the receptionist, and Hibiki can't help but notice she has cat-like ears. They are then brought to Balls, who Hibiki notices is very ripped. Balls doesn't hesitate to show off his muscles by ripping his shirt off. Hibiki is impressed and decides to look up to him, and Balls finally introduces himself as the guild master. They begin chatting about muscle-building techniques, much to the annoyance of both girls. When they have had enough, they cast water spells to knock down Hibiki and Balls. Once both men are dried off, they decide to go back to the matter at hand. Emalia shows them the crystal horn she wants to sell, which Balls notices is 3 times bigger than the last one she brought in 3 years ago. He offers 400 gold for it, which makes Hibiki happy since it's 100 more than Emalia predicted it would be worth selling. However, Emalia complains that the last one she brought in was 230 gold, so they should buy this one off her for 800, which confuses Hibiki since he thought Emalia would be happy with 300 gold. Emalia and Balls begin going back and forth, haggling the price, but Balls complains that he can't go higher than 608 gold. This makes Emalia scoff since the main adventurers guild can't pay her price. They decide to settle for 700 gold, which makes Emalia pleased. However, Jewel isn't too happy, so she tells Balls that since he agreed to such a high price, his salary will be deducted to make up for it. Emalia beams at Hibiki because of their sale, but she also feels confident that Hibiki will ask her to form a party with him. She doesn't notice her button popping again until it's off. Jewel is quick to shoo the men away from the room, claiming she will handle the transaction herself. In the lobby, Hibiki gets a notification stating he leveled up in the tutorial skill. His status support brings up a dictionary to show him what it means. He learns that the tutorial skill is given to people with low survival capabilities, and that the god of the world will be able to provide support for him. He suddenly hears a male voice agree with the explanation, but since he doesn't hear it again, he thinks it's just his imagination. Hibiki considers all his luck up to this point and decides it must be the god's doing, so he looks to the ceiling and thanks God for everything. The same voice happily accepts Hibiki's praise. This time, Hibiki is sure he heard someone, so the chief god decides to tell him that he is the god who has been supporting him since he arrived in this world. He promises to help Hibiki as much as he can, but Hibiki also needs to take care of himself. Hibiki is a little put off by how carefree the chief god sounds. He even panics when the chief god's voice disappears from his mind because he was hoping to ask more questions. His status support then tells him that the guide will now end due to his tutorial skill increasing. Suddenly, Emalia shows up, but Miater, a guild clerk, informs her that she has a quest that needs to be done. Emalia reads the envelope handed to her and tells Hibiki that she has to accept the request since it's from her hometown, but she cannot take him with her this time. Hibiki realizes that Emalia was his guide. Meanwhile, Eva is trying to look for something, but the mirror says is not in her current location. She wonders where it could be, then a location comes to mind and she decides to head there. Back with Hibiki and Emalia, Hibiki insists she can go ahead without worrying about him. Emalia had already asked Jewel to look after Hibiki, but wonders what Hibiki plans to do next. Hibiki answers that he plans on becoming an adventurer since there are non-combatant quests available. Before they part, Emalia tells Hibiki that he can stay at her place and hands him a map leading to the inn where she has a room. She instructs him to look for a girl named Tanya when he gets there. Emalia adds that if he ever plans on traveling far, he should inform Jewel so Emalia can meet up with him and join him. Hibiki wants to return her cloak, but Emalia insists that he keep it as a parting gift, though Hibiki says that she needs it more because her button keeps popping off. In order to avoid the topic, she rushes off, wishing him luck in his future. As she runs off, she feels embarrassed since Hibiki saw her chest. She accidentally runs into Eva and sends her sprawling to the ground. Eva tells her that she is fine despite everything. A guard comes running to them, and Emalia explains she is rushing because she is being called back to her hometown. Upon studying her more, Eva realizes Emalia is heading toward the kingdom of Fairnote. When Emalia confirms it, she smiles and mentions she is heading there as well. After some time, Hibiki spends most of his time sleeping. He looks at his phone and notices it has finally died. He wonders if he'll make it home to his world and if he'll ever get to talk to the chief god again. He had tried asking Jewel about his world, but she only directed him to a questionable location. He wonders why he was even sent here. Mid-thought, he hears Tanya come in. It turns out she is worried for him since he hasn't left his room the entire day. He promises to head down soon. When Tanya leaves, Hibiki thinks about taking a job since he doesn't have much money left to last a long time. He pulls up his status screen to see if he has something that can help him do a job. However, he isn't sure what he can do given the information displayed. His status report tells him to avoid solo combat, and he notices he has a new title called Older Lady Killer. He also has 2 new skills and thinks that medical book sounds like the most useful. Status support tells him that he will be able to absorb medical information and use it simply by reading pages from a medical book. He decides that he can use it to his advantage, and even after learning that it might take time, he still decides to do it. His status support sighs and materializes a medical book for him to start. He approaches the book and suddenly gets zapped with information. Meanwhile, Emalia and Ever have started traveling together, and Emalia decides to tell her about Hibiki. Based on her stories, Ever thinks that Emalia might be in love with him, despite Emalia insisting that she isn't. Up ahead, they see a maid named Styria who seems to know Emalia. Upon recognizing her, Emalia runs up to Styria to hug her, then introduces her to Ever as her chief maid back home. Ever hugs Emalia's arm and tells Styria that she's a party member of Emalia, but Styria suddenly has a furious expression on her face and grumbles. A few days later, Hibiki finally finishes reading the medical book. He decides it's finally time to get out of his room and buy some armor. He settles for some simple garb and begins walking around town, and his status support tells him that acquiring different skills will require different methods. He thanks her for always helping him and decides to refer to her by a nickname instead. When she doesn't respond for a while, he thinks she didn't like her new name, but to his surprise, she uses it and accepts the change. Later at the guild, the Silver Banner rushes in asking for help since Jade, one of their combatants, is severely injured. Hibiki recognizes them immediately. As everyone tries to figure out a way to heal him, Hibiki studies Jade, and status support tells him that he could probably heal him using his newly acquired skills. He tries to ask the party if he can take a look at Jade, and at first they are hesitant after learning he's only an appraiser. But when he tells them that he has medical skills, Colonel, a member of the party, decides to be the first to trust him. The others begin moving away from Jade as he is being examined. He determines that Jade is afflicted with Dirith poison, which makes it hard to stop the bleeding. Status support tells him that Jade will likely only last 5 minutes. In order to cure him, he needs to use Hyper Cure and execute a perfect heal, but his magical points aren't enough to use either skill. The rest of the party tries to get answers from him, and Hibiki shares that the bleeding won't stop due to the Dirith poison. The party is surprised to learn this, and Hibiki tries to ask the guild members if they know Perfect Heal or Hyper Cure. However, no one apparently knows those high-level skills. Status support then tells him to use the skill called Contract to allow people to temporarily lend their magical points to him, so he can use the skills needed. With no time to explain, he tells Jade's party members to enter a contract with him so he can use their combined magical points to perform the healing spells. They begin verbally agreeing to his terms, but the magical points he acquired still aren't enough. Jewel decides to lend her magical points as well, and once Hibiki extends the contract to her, his magical points are finally enough to perform Hyper Cure. With the poison out of the way, he then casts Perfect Heal, which manages to restore Jade's lost limbs. Everyone is relieved that his magic worked, but suddenly Hibiki faints. When he feels his consciousness returning to him, he finds himself at the cafe with his friends again. Amani in particular is scolding him for acting on his own without thinking. She tries to remind him that there won't always be a person available to save him every time. He is interrupted from his dream when he hears trumpets in his head and status support congratulating him for increasing another level. He moves around trying to hold the voice down, but when he relaxes, Jewel appears right next to him. Happy to see that he is awake, she takes the opportunity to thank him for saving Jade, revealing that Jade is actually her younger brother and that they have different mothers, which is why their race is different. Hibiki tells her that he only managed to save everyone through everyone's efforts. However, Jewel insists he accept the praise because no one in the guild could have saved Jade. He smiles brightly at her due to the praise, and she finds herself blushing at his charm. She manages to revert to the matter at hand and tells him they need to take precautions and not talk about how he knows 2 high-level healing spells. She worries that people might try to take advantage of him for money, so she wants him to join an adventuring party for his protection. Hibiki isn't too keen on the idea because he knows it will be temporary, but he has to admit that having a companion sounds like a good idea since he can't fight. Jewel then suggests that he should hire a bodyguard. Meanwhile, in a cell somewhere, a little girl clutches the arm of a beast folk as the beast promises not to let anyone come close to her. One day, Hibiki visits the Debbie company to hire a bodyguard. Upon receiving him, Ajarathan, the owner, is immediately enchanted by his financial scent. He is then shown a bunch of muscular men but decides to reject them all. As they file out of the room, Hibiki feels bad for them in his head. The truth is, even if they look strong, their MP is very low. Ajarathan offers to show him other people, but then Hibiki hears the chief god suggest that he find his own bodyguard. As they walk down the halls, Ajarathan promises to help him to the best of his abilities because he can smell financial wealth from Hibiki. Hibiki praises him and learns that Ajarathan has a skill that allows him to smell people who are blessed with high financial status in the future. Hibiki is then drawn to a dark hallway, but Ajarathan advises him not to go there since the people he has there are not suited for combat or labor. However, since they cannot return to their homelands, Ajarathan had decided to house them. Hibiki considers that the people Ajarathan keeps there are like him, so he tries to ask if Ajarathan can show them to him. Ajarathan is suddenly hit with his skill and happily agrees to show Hibiki due to how strong his scent has become. He is led to a cage where Claude, an injured beastman, and Lillian, a little girl, are kept. He notices their injuries, and Ajarathan tells Hibiki that Claude ended up in that state due to wanting to protect Lillian. As for Lillian, she is said to have strong magical capabilities but has no control over them. Claude suddenly lashes out, telling Hibiki to get lost. Hibiki is taken aback, but his status support decides to appraise Claude. It seems there is some falsification in the record, so status support suggests he use his skill, Expert Eye, to reappraise him. When he learns that the chief god had given him such an insanely strong skill, he feels that the chief god gave him too much. Regardless, he reappraises Claude and learns his name, race, and other details. He learns that Claude has a curse but decides to read about it later. What catches his attention is that Claude has a hero level of 95. He then appraises Lillian and learns that she will be a sage and has a skill called Raging Sanctuary. He wonders why the chief god gave such an unstable skill to a child. The chief god claims that he had no choice because of the trial of the sage. Hibiki decides to worry about it another time because the MP those two have is enough to give him casting abilities. After getting the chief god's approval to let them form a party, status support tells him to use relief measure. He wonders if the skill will help lift the curse from Claude, but status support does not answer the inquiry. He then asks Ajarathan if he can take Claude and Lillian, which Ajarathan immediately agrees to, unable to resist the potent smell of fortune coming his way. His reaction scares Hibiki a little. Hibiki brings Claude and Lillian to a forest clearing. Claude is suspicious of Hibiki and is shocked when Hibiki reveals he wants to heal him. Lillian is immediately on board with the idea to help Hibiki, which confuses Claude since they just met. Lillian expresses how much she wants to heal Claude because Claude always helped her when everyone else refused. Hibiki tells her all she needs to do is accept his contract to share MP, and he can do the rest. Once she accepts, he immediately activates the medical book and uses Perfect Heal. Claude is surprised when he feels his strength returning and his limbs regrowing. When the spell ends, Lillian immediately hugs Claude, and Claude thanks Hibiki. Claude admits that he feels a lot better now that he is healed, but shares that he is not yet in top form. Hibiki explains that Claude is still afflicted by the curse, which surprises Claude since he didn't think Hibiki would know about it. Hibiki even shares that he knows Lillian will become a sage in the future. He admits he can tell all these things because he has a skill called Expert Eye. Ignoring Claude's baffled state, he decides to try lifting the curse by executing Relief Measure Level 1. Claude suddenly feels the chains of the curse weigh him down, but suddenly a giant pair of scissors appears in the sky and cuts him. Hibiki panics because he thinks he messed up, but only the chains are damaged and a portion of the curse is lifted. Even Claude is shocked that he survived. Everyone is relieved, but Hibiki notices that the curse isn't fully lifted. The chief god answers that it's because his skill is still at level 1. Hibiki makes it his goal to fully remove the chains someday by leveling his skill. Despite only lifting it a little, Claude notices the immediate change in his power. To show his gratitude, he kneels before Hibiki and thanks him for his healing. He admits he lost a lot due to the curse. He wants to pledge his loyalty to Hibiki by performing the Ceremony of Allegiance. He explains that the ceremony will solidify their pact, and he will forever serve and protect Hibiki. To Hibiki, it sounds like he's only announcing his decision, so he decides to allow it, which instantly makes Claude's tail wag. Status support suggests that Hibiki also use contracts, so this will bind both parties to their promise. She insists that it will also make Claude happy, and Hibiki decides that there is no harm in it, and if it will make Claude happy, then he can do it. He executes contract, which brings a tear to Claude's eye. Without hesitation, Claude begins reciting his pledge and instructs Hibiki to accept it verbally. Hibiki accepts it, and suddenly a light shines on the backs of their hands, signifying that their pact was accepted by the light spirits, and the symbol on their hands is proof of their contract. Claude tells him that Hibiki is free to call him Claude, and Lillian is delighted that things are finally looking brighter for the two of them. Meanwhile, with Amalia, they are trekking toward the elven town, but Amalia notices that Styria is getting tired, so she suggests stopping by the hot springs. The suggestion energizes Styria since this is the perfect chance to see Amalia's chest. She phrases it weirdly, which confuses Eivor. Styria suddenly recalls that they are with Eivor and decides that they should continue their journey instead. She reasons that going to the hot springs will leave them vulnerable and they cannot risk trusting Eivor. However, Amalia gets excited over the idea of experiencing a bath with her first female friend, so she insists they stop after all. With Hibiki, he explains his lack of MP to Claude and Lillian, and the two immediately agree to help and enter into a contract with him. Status support tells him that his grimoire has leveled up. It seems that Claude notices that he appears to be talking to a voice, and he asks about it. When Hibiki describes how he's been learning things, Claude is shocked and asks if he has the tutorial skill. He gets even more shocked when Hibiki confirms it, and also confirms that he possesses the title of a wanderer of a different world. Apparently, it's a rumored title that exists, and Claude is aware that there are people with that title roaming around. Lillian is curious about what everything means, and Claude tells her that it means Hibiki has come from a different world, but she doesn't need to think of Hibiki differently, because what matters is that Hibiki saved them. Claude doesn't seem to care too much about which world he is from, but he is amazed that Hibiki possesses the tutorial skill, which makes the chief god laugh because Claude thinks the skill is amazing when he thinks it really isn't. But then he realizes he is tired because he is using a third of his power to keep the skill running continuously. As they walk, Claude believes that the chief god is the one guiding Hibiki. He explains that this world has 11 gods and the chief god is the first god. Skills such as Expert Eye and Tutorial can only be bestowed by the chief god. Hibiki is shocked at how powerful the chief god is, as the chief god tells Hibiki to praise and be amazed by him more. Claude is still wrapping his head around how Hibiki is so favored by the chief god, but he can understand why because he considers Hibiki amazing as well. Hibiki feels he isn't worthy, but Claude and Lillian are. He admits that he is shocked at Lillian's skill, but it appears Claude is unaware of what the Raging Sanctuary skill that Lillian possesses actually does. Even Lillian is confused, so Hibiki explains that her skill destroys her when she uses magic. Hearing the news makes Lillian depressed as she is reminded of her past. Claude explains that Lillian's immense magic is what caused her family to shun and sell her. Hibiki thinks that the chief god is to blame for her misfortune, but Claude explains that he doesn't think the chief god is the one who gave Lillian her skill. He believes it's the god of magic since it seems to be in that god's jurisdiction. The chief god panics a little as the god of magic unleashes her wrath on him. Hibiki hears her voice, and the god of magic explains that there was a mistake in giving Lillian that skill. She tells Hibiki that she cannot undo the skill once it is granted, but Hibiki can use the grimoire skill to help adjust her MP output so the burden on Lillian's body won't be too harsh. On the ground, the chief god repents for his mistake and asks for her forgiveness, though the god of magic is still greatly upset with him. She pretends to call upon the god of the underworld to pick the chief god up, and he suddenly begs her not to do that, which doesn't impress the god of magic. Hibiki can hear all the fighting in his head, but he decides to tell Claude that the god of magic reassured him that Lillian will be fine. As Lillian and Claude praise the god of magic, Hibiki can still hear her torturing the chief god, which worries him. Suddenly, status support tells him that Tutorial and Expert Eye are temporarily unavailable to him. Hibiki briefly wonders if it's because the chief god is not okay, but he prays for the best. Meanwhile, the god of magic studies Hibiki from the god's realm. She feels she has seen him before. Hibiki and the rest stop for a bit, and he decides to try using the grimoire skill. What appears before them is a talking white cat who introduces herself as Veni. Veni tries to explain that she will be Lillian's teacher, but Lillian immediately begins cuddling with Veni. This makes Veni give in to the bliss of being petted. Even Hibiki wants to pet Veni, which makes Claude jealous, though he tries to hide it from Hibiki, despite the aura he gives off. Hibiki does feel a strange aura, but it disappears every time he tries to look for the source. He decides to stop the search and ask Veni about the grimoire, and Veni explains that she is the grimoire and anything magically related can be handled by her. Hibiki pets her and praise her, and Claude immediately fumes, which scares Veni because he looks vicious at the fact that Hibiki has yet to pet him despite knowing him longer. He quickly apologizes, and Hibiki pretends not to notice, much to Veni's shock and anger. Meanwhile, at the hot springs, the girls are enjoying a dip in the warm water. Styria is odling Amalia's chest, but snaps out of it when Amalia asks her what her father wants from her. Styria admits she was never told the details. Deciding not to dwell on it, Amalia tries to ask Eva if she wants her to wash her back, but Eva turns her down. This puts Amalia in a down mood, and Styria interjects that Amalia might come off too strong to Eva. As Amalia speaks about wanting to be friends with Eva, Styria takes the opportunity to get a closer look at Amalia's chest. Eva can't help but notice, so she decides to rile Styria up a bit by offering to wash Amalia's back. Amalia gets excited since it seems Eva considers her a friend. One day, Hibiki's party goes shopping for equipment, and Hibiki is shocked that Claude's weapon of choice is a spear. Claude explains it's the better choice for his build. As for his armor, he explains that he only needs his vital areas protected because he gets too warm if he wears too much armor. Lillian also gets to choose new clothes for herself, but she and Hibiki are shocked when they learn the price is 25 gold coins. However, Claude says it's cheap, so they end up paying without complaint. Lillian feels guilty and tries to return the clothes, but Hibiki insists that she keep them. The shopkeeper tells Lillian that she has a good older brother, which makes Lillian think about the title. Hibiki also encourages her to choose a staff for herself. Though Hibiki seems confident, the truth is he is aware that he is running low on money. Lillian thanks him, calling him master, but Hibiki tells her to think of something else to call him. She asks if it's okay for her to call him older brother instead, and he agrees since it feels more familial. Benny gets annoyed and asks Hibiki to buy something for her as well. The shopkeeper tells him that it cost 15 gold, which he ends up paying. Once fitted with her new collar, they go to a clearing to begin Hibiki's and Lillian's training. Benny insists that training is more important than adventuring at the moment since they lack the fundamentals. She reassures them that, as a grimoire, she will be able to help them. Status support tells Hibiki that Veni is a technical skill that allows him to acquire knowledge and other magical skills. Hibiki suddenly feels inspired because he thinks he can use magic as attacks, but Veni tells him that he can only learn household magic. Hibiki pales and Lillian tries to cheer him up by saying that it's useful and that Veni is also amazing for agreeing to teach them. Veni boasts that she is a sacred beast created by the god of magic, so it's only proper for Hibiki and Lillian to call her master. She then settles onto Lillian's lap and tells them that they need to control Lillian's magic. Veni tells Hibiki that he has to be registered as the accountable person. Without further explanation, she suddenly bites him. She then trots toward Lillian and tells her that her magical power has been reduced by 10%, with her MP still remaining. They need to lower it to 90% before training, then slowly work on increasing it again when she has better control. Next, Veni says that Hibiki needs to learn magic power circulation. It's a skill where two people hold hands and are able to feel the flow of their magic and learn how to control it. Hibiki only gives Veni a confused expression. Veni feels irritated and tells Claude to take over to show him how it's done. Claude steps forward and asks Hibiki to focus, but Hibiki has no idea what he means. Veni fumes that Hibiki should just close his eyes and instructs Claude to send a little magic toward him. Claude agrees and takes Hibiki's hand, sending an intense amount into Hibiki, which makes Veni scream and causes Hibiki to pass out. When Hibiki wakes up, he sees emptiness. Then he feels the presence of someone and finds himself near a lake in the evening. He turns to find an elf he isn't familiar with. The elf calls out to Claude, and Hibiki notices that he has turned into Claude. He tries to get a hold of himself, and he finds himself suddenly believing that he is Claude. He sits down next to the elf and now recognizes that she is Anastasia, who often watches the moon. Claude finds himself remembering that Anastasia was the most beautiful elf he had ever seen. Anastasia had been by his side for a long time. They were even at a party together, and they shared many moments. Looking at Anastasia now, he believed he would continue the rest of his life by her side. But then one evening, several of his companions fell, and he even lost his limbs during a battle. In front of him was a bloody Anastasia who was eerily pleased with everything. He screamed in turmoil before blacking out. Hibiki can suddenly hear Claude's voice as he has now returned to his body. However, he is confused. In his mind, he is still Claude, and he doesn't seem to understand that what he just saw was a memory of Claude's. It takes him some time, but he finally remembers who he is. Hibiki doesn't understand why he thought he was Claude, so Claude explains that he sent too much of his magic to Hibiki. Veni immediately jumps in to scold Claude for not listening to her instructions. Veni then asks Hibiki for embarrassing details from Claude's memories, like whether he wet his bed. Hibiki tells Veni that he thinks he saw something beautiful, but he doesn't remember much of what he saw. Veni leaves since she thinks it's not interesting, and Hibiki tries to remember who he saw in Claude's memory. On another day, Hibiki is in the middle of his household magic training. He looks at his status to see how well his progress is, as he recalls that he needs the help of spirits to perform this type of magic. He needs to do chores to please the spirits, and once the spirits are satisfied with his work, he will be able to wield those elements to help with household chores. So he does all the chores, but he can't help but feel that what he is doing is useless. However, status support tells him that this is training, and it's the only way to activate his magic. Lillian and Claude enter the room, but Claude accidentally hits a bucket of water, causing the liquid to spill all over the floor. Hibiki isn't mad, and even calls Claude cute for being clumsy despite holding the title of hero. Claude blushes since he counts it as praise, but he still feels immensely guilty as Hibiki continues his training. After making sure everything is spotless, Hibiki asks if he learned anything, but he hasn't. Tanga notices that her inn is incredibly clean and finds out that Hibiki is responsible. She gives him a suggestive look and tells him he'll have an extra plate of food for dinner, which makes Hibiki cheer. She tells him to hurry down, and his party begins making their way there, but Claude spills another bucket of water. On another day, Lillian is steadily progressing and controlling her magic. Claude suggests that Hibiki get some practical training as well. However, Hibiki admits he doesn't know how to use his sword. Claude suggests a different weapon, and Hibiki immediately starts training with a bow. But all his shots land too short, to the point that even Claude becomes strict with him. Hibiki tries again but fails several more times, realizing that archery is harder than it looks. Claude reassures him that everyone starts out bad. Hibiki asks for a break because his hands are raw, but Claude says he can easily heal them, so there isn't really any need for a break. So that is how he ends up firing numerous arrows during that training session while silently praying for Himalaya to save him. With Himalaya, she and her companions are traveling through the forest, and Himalaya's thoughts drift to Hibiki. She wonders if he'll be surprised that she managed to get companions. Himalaya tries to hint that Ivor is the reason, but Ivor doesn't get the hint at all. They reach a point that leads to a shortcut to the Elven Kingdom, but Himalaya decides they should take the long path. She reasons that the shortcut leads to a ruined fortress, and it is filled with souls that play tricks on people. However, Ivor suggests they use the shortcut instead because there might be hidden treasure. Himalaya decides to follow Ivor, despite Styria's protests. Himalaya explains that she's actually low on coins, which makes Styria wonder what happened to the money she earned from the Crystal Horned Rabbit. Himalaya shares that she wouldn't walk around carrying that much money. The group treks along the path, and Ivor mentions that they will be fine since they are all friends who stick close to each other. Being referred to as a friend makes Himalaya ecstatic. Meanwhile, Hibiki and the others are out camping. Hibiki busies himself by preparing them a meal. Lillian hovers nearby, curious about what he is doing, and even asks if she can help. He allows Lillian to help him gather some ingredients, and when he is done adjusting the stew, he invites Lillian to give it a taste. Lillian is impressed with the flavor, and since she responds positively, Hibiki decides that meal preparations are complete. He then sets their food up, which includes stew, grilled horned rabbit, and some bread. Everyone looks at the food, impressed by the spread. When they finally dig in, they all feel happy with the flavors. Hibiki decides to finally take a bite and immediately notices that something is wrong. He asks if Claude properly cleaned the mushrooms, which earns him a reaction from Claude. Then Hibiki asks about the apples he asked Claude to peel, and Claude apologizes because cooking isn't his forte. Lillian finds the apples behind him with almost nothing left for them to eat since they were cut weirdly. Even the chunks of vegetables are too big. Hibiki asks if he can at least butcher monsters, and Claude claims that he can, so Hibiki can just leave all the butchering to him. Hibiki decides to agree with the plan, but comments that Claude's meg skills for other ingredients are just level 0. Claude reasons that his skills are dulled due to the curse, though Hibiki has a hard time believing him. But Claude swears that once the curse is broken, he will be more useful to the party. The party begins teasing him about how long that will take, making Claude feel smaller despite his size. However, Hibiki remembers he has a question about the curse and asks Claude if he remembers who is responsible for it. Unfortunately, Claude admits that he doesn't. Hibiki decides not to worry about it. He continues the cleanup and resolves to dedicate himself to finding a way back home. Then he gets an update from status support that he learned Bubble Wash, which makes him happy because he finally learned new magic. Status support interrupts again and tells him to use the world map. When he opens it, he sees that a rushing boar is heading in their direction. Claude manages to see it as well and braces for battle. Hibiki is surprised to see the pure rage it possesses, but Veni is confident that Claude can handle it. Claude charges up his weapon and pierces the boar with a powerful strike, stopping it in its tracks. The rest of the party approaches him, and Claude warns Hibiki that the smell of blood could attract more monsters, so they need to deal with the body right away. Veni tells Lillian to finally use her magic, making Lillian feel happy to be useful. Lillian uses a water spell called Odor Isolation, which cleans the boar of its blood. With the boar all clean, Claude happily suggests teaching Hibiki how to butcher meat properly. Hibiki pales, wondering if this is Claude's way of getting revenge for his earlier comments about his mag skills. With Himalaya, they near the fortress and notice that it seems completely abandoned. They decide to split up to look for treasure. Ivor hangs back a little and summons her magical mirror, confirming that there is a restless soul nearby. However, it doesn't seem to be the one she is searching for. She then hears Himalaya scream. Both Himalaya and Styria are trapped in their fantasies. Himalaya is surrounded by immense wealth, while Styria feels like she is in a room filled with several Himalayas for her to cuddle with. Ivor enters the room at the odd sight of them acting happy over regular items. She decides that she'll just need to snap them out of their fantasies and activates her magic to use against them. With Hibiki, they are done cutting and separating the meat, but that means they are completely messy from doing so. This reminds Hibiki that he can use Bubble Wash to get them clean. At first, his party is happy that he learned a new skill, but they aren't too pleased when Hibiki suggests trying the spell on them as a test. He gets irritated at their hesitation, but decides to use Bubble Wash on Claude anyway, who screams as the spell hits him. Bubble Wash coats Claude completely in bubbles, and once the bubbles disappear, Claude looks refreshed in body and soul, and he even comments that his tiredness feels as if it were washed away. Thanks for watching. Subscribe now and see what happens next.